Hello, I'm Chris Lee at southeastern14.com, or the 14 as we like to call it. Blake Lovell joins me. We are going to talk some SEC basketball. We are going to have some thumbnail previews of all the teams, tell you what you missed in the offseason. Today, Blake, we will start with Vanderbilt, a program that has fallen on hard times in recent years. Jerry Stackhouse entering year three, and a lot of changes in the offseason. Some comings, some goings, one key get back. Where do you see the Commodores going into year three? Because I think Vanderbilt, to me, I'm not going to say a team that makes a leap into the upper half, but certainly a team that's got a case to be better than it's been the last 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they're going to be better. I think the challenge comes with the SEC is also going to be, I think, much better from top to bottom. Well, maybe not at the bottom, which we'll get to some of those teams eventually in the series we're doing. But Vanderbilt, I don't think is going to be in that category, which, as we know, past several years they have been. I don't think they're going to be in the same category of some of the other teams we're going to talk about that may be the bottom two teams in the SEC in that range. I think they're going to be better. It's just a matter of, like we're saying, getting Scottie Pippen Jr. back, who we're going to talk about. I mean, that's the most significant part of their offseason. And certainly the outlook for Vanderbilt changes significantly without him. But now that he is back and you're adding some other pieces to the mix, which we'll also discuss, I think they're going to be better. But as we know, sometimes in the SEC, or at least this current version of the SEC we've seen since 2016 or so, being better may not always just be enough. Like it's you have to sometimes be significantly better to maybe make that leap. But guess what the positive of that is? For Vanderbilt, any progress, I think, is good progress at this point, because as we know, this has been a program that, unlike other, we haven't seen a situation like this, I think, in quite a while in the SEC, where a program just completely bottoms out to the point that it did several years ago when they didn't win an SEC game. They had a long losing streak in league play. We had not seen that in a long time. So I think now we've seen some of the progress that's been made on the court. It hasn't always translated to wins thus far in Jerry Stackhouse's first couple seasons, but I think this season there's the opportunity to translate that into wins. I think it's just a matter of how many is that going to be against what is going to, I think, potentially be, I don't know if it's going to be the best conference in college basketball from top to bottom, but I think it's going to be right there, maybe with a chance to have that argument for number two or somewhere in there.
Well, the issue with the program like Vanderbilt, which has seen a coaching change a few years back after Bryce Drew went winless, is once you get caught in a downward spiral the way that program has been, where it's just been at the bottom of the league for 3 or 4 years now, and just frankly not having to play in one of the Wednesday night SEC tournament games is a huge step for that program right now. But the thing under that circumstance, Blake, that you watch, you say is, okay, when it develops good players, are you able to keep those guys, or do guys start looking around saying this is a sinking ship with the transfer rules and NIL and all sorts of other things that have come into play very recently? Is it worth my while to stay at Vanderbilt, or is it worth my while to go elsewhere? Well, you had their two biggest names, Dylan Dessou, who led the conference in rebounding, looked around and said, hey, I'm better off home going to play for Chris Beard at Texas, which is near where I grew up, just a few minutes away. He did that. Massive blow for the program. The other one that Vanderbilt got early was Scottie Pippen Jr., who declared for the draft and really literally at the 11th hour decided to come back. I don't know whether getting Dessou or Pippen back is the bigger one. I suspect it's Pippen. In fact, I'm almost sure of it. But of those two, Vanderbilt gets one of them back, and certainly Scottie Pippen Jr. is going to be a huge centerpiece of everything the Commodores do once again.
Yeah, I mean, he is. We talked about this last season. Like, he is a top 5 player in the league in under, I think in best case scenario. Like, he's in that range. I think if we're talking about guys who, he's going to produce, and he's going to have the opportunity. Like, he's going to still have the bulk of the load on this particular roster, although I think he has more help around him now than he's had in recent seasons, even though you do lose Dessou, like you said. But at his best, I think he's someone that, like, he's a first team all SEC guy. Like, he is a top 5 player in the league, I think, under the best circumstances. Like, I think he's that good. But like you said, it's also one of those where how do things shift maybe this season now that you do have maybe a better supporting cast than they've had, with some of the transfers that they're bringing in? And maybe I think for the first time, and I don't think we've been able to say this for Vanderbilt in several years now. Like, I think they have a little bit of depth. I don't want to say they're not going to be the deepest team in the SEC or anything like that, but I think they have a little bit of depth to work with to where you don't necessarily have to be 10 guys deep, but I think they've got a pretty solid group maybe they can go to, depending on, pick your number based on what you think about each individual player. But I think they've got at least a situation where, hey, if one or two guys like Pippen and Dessou aren't necessarily at their best, do you still have a situation where you can win? Now, of course, you removed Dessou from that equation this season, but I think they can actually answer that question now to where maybe we actually can still, let's say Pippen doesn't come out and score 25 points a game, can we still find ways to win? I think they have a few more ways of doing that this season than they did previously. And so that's where getting him back, at least one of them, like you said, is such a significant thing, because otherwise, I think we're having the same conversation we probably have had the last couple of seasons if neither one of them come back.
Okay, I want to circle back to that depth piece because I really think that's going to determine this team's altitude, but I'm not ready to do it right now because I want to talk about the other guys they added. Because frankly, if they don't add these guys, we're not having this conversation. The conversation is it's a miracle for them to escape the Wednesday, game one in the SEC tournament.
Yeah.
Now, I think with them adding 3 transfers and probably one in particular, I think you would agree, Liam Robbins from Minnesota being that one, but also Rodney Chapman from Dayton and Taryn Frank, who's a little bit of a wild card, played ball together with Scottie Pippen Jr. in high school out in California, went to TCU, didn't play much. I think there might have been an injury in play there, but he's a guy I think that can bring them some defense. But to me, Robbins was the key. Now, I don't know that you straight up trade Dessou for Robbins because I think Dessou's got more eligibility left if he doesn't go pro. But let me just ask you, next year, if you have a choice of having either Liam Robbins, who blocks some more shots, doesn't rebound as much, both can score a little bit, Dessou can probably score more. If you had to pick either Robbins or Dessou, who do you take on that roster as the second piece, which I think Robbins will be?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because I think the one thing Vanderbilt has lacked in recent seasons, even for Dessou, as good as he's been, like, this is a roster that's lacked that experience you need, right? And you're talking about someone in Robbins who is coming over from, again, from a statistical standpoint, the best conference in the country in the Big Ten, and he's played at Minnesota now for 3 seasons. Of course, he didn't play a ton that first season, but we're talking about a guy who played 27 minutes a game in 1920, 25 minutes a game 2021, and averaged double figures in points and averaged at least 6.5 rebounds, right? So, like, this is not a guy, and this is what I think we always have to look at. When you make that transition into the SEC, if you're a transfer, even the most experienced guys we've seen come in, but let's say they averaged 4 points and 2 assists and 10 minutes of action at a mid-major or low-major school. Those are always tough, I think, to say, okay, I don't know if this guy's going to necessarily be able to have that breakout he's looking for in the SEC. Meanwhile, you have a guy like this who has already proven it in, again, statistically, you can argue whether it is or not, but statistically, the best conference in the country in the Big Ten, and yet he's been someone who has just consistently produced in that conference. Again, not just one season. Like, it's not a fluke thing. Like, he's done it back-to-back years now. And he, by the way, he also has a very unique skill set in that he's 7 foot and, can add some things there too. So I think for this particular team, and like you said, we're not saying this to diss Dylan Dessou, because I think he's going to wind up playing a lot at Texas. And I think Texas, of course, as we know, given everything they brought in, they're going to be a top 10 team and they're going to have a chance to probably make a Final Four. But I think just for this particular team, when you look at it, I don't think you say, Robbins is some sort of runner-up prize from the Dessou thing. I think he's actually someone that's going to be able to come in knowing that he's already produced at a high level. And the scenario that he did coming from a power conference to power conference, I think that's more encouraging to me, because it's not a guessing game of knowing, all right, is this guy going to be able to transfer up from a low major to a power conference and be able to produce when maybe he didn't even produce at the lower conference, level. He's already proven it. And so I think that's a significant thing you have to look at.
Well, and 2.7 blocks per game. Vanderbilt
Right.
has not really had a rim protector since Luke Cornett. He led, I believe, the Big Ten in block shots. And so that is a really scarce commodity, maybe the most scarce commodity in college basketball. Now, foul trouble, endurance, those sorts of things. He played 24.7 minutes a game, which for a big man is okay. It's not great. That number may need to be 30 at Vanderbilt next year, and big men have trouble staying on the floor. But that is a dimension that Vanderbilt will have that a lot of even really great programs will not have on the team next year.
Yeah, you pointed out the block aspect. That's important too because let's face it, like this is a team I think defensively you've seen it, like you're what you're going to get. I think sort of in a Jerry Stackhouse coach team, and it's not like they were just completely awful. I think on the defensive end, but if you have someone like that who does have the size, like we said, it's being a 7-footer, because that's just it's so important. Like in the SEC, knowing the type of competition you're going to go up against, you're not only going to face a bunch of just ridiculously athletic guards who can score in the paint, they can shoot it from the perimeter, but you're also going to have some big men that are physical specimens. And I'm sure, as I go down the list and as we talk about each of these teams, we're going to point out more than a handful of those types of guys. So that's where, being able to block shots, be a presence on defense, but also, like you said, we have seen one of the things we have seen with guys, maybe sometimes who transfer in to the SEC. And as we pointed out many times, Chris, the SEC is a league known for its fouling and its free throw shooting. That is something that you have to kind of be aware of, is knowing that sometimes the pace and the speed of the game, I think, in the SEC, given how many programs we're seeing go to more of that up-tempo type of style at times, that is something that can be a challenge in terms of staying on the floor, and he's going to have to be someone that does that to be able, I think, to give this team the ultimate boost that he can give them.
Well, the piece that maybe gets lost in discussion amidst Robbins and Pippen coming back is Rodney Chapman. And you mentioned defense. Man, this team just has not been able to play it for several years now. And I think Robbins gives them a dimension that very much helps on the back end, but their guards couldn't guard. And Rodney Chapman is not really an offensive-oriented player, but he was a key guy on that Dayton team 2 years ago that was maybe headed for a Final Four before COVID-19 derailed the season, averaged 1.8 steals per game. I guess he's kind of a combo guard, can probably relieve Pippen some at the point. How much do you think that helps him overall, and particularly on the defensive end?
Yeah, he's a hard-nosed type guy, and I think he's a Jerry Stackhouse player. When you watch, if you've seen him play, like you said, when he was at Dayton, and that's another scenario I think where it's okay. You're transferring from the Atlantic 10 to the SEC, but like you made a very good point about, this is not like Dayton was just some team at times. Like they were a potential Final Four contender a couple seasons ago. And on that team, he played 27, 28 minutes a game, I think. And really since he was there, like in the 4 seasons at Dayton, he averaged, I think it was, I don't even remember what it was, but like he played at least 20 minutes per game every single season. The last 2 of those, he played 32 minutes a game. So this is not a guy, once again, that's just coming off the bench, playing a minor role for a mid-major level program. Like he's actually playing for a team that proved that it could be one of the best teams in the country, and he was a big part of that. So I think just having that experience, and like you said, he also has the skill set of not necessarily having to be a guy who's going to come in and score 15 points a game. He's going to play that role of needing someone to stop the ridiculously athletic guards that I just mentioned in the SEC, where you're going to have, a host of guys around the league that are going to go on and play in the NBA, and you could have the lottery picks and all this other stuff. So you need a guy like that on the roster to win some of those games in the conference. And I think this is where someone like Chapman, again, someone who's already played 4 years of college basketball, he's done it at a well-respected program at Dayton, and he's just played a lot of minutes. I think those are all valuable assets on a Vanderbilt team that as we said, hasn't at times just been terrible overall, I think from a talent standpoint, but they just have not had a lot of experience. They haven't had guys who have played a lot of minutes at a top level, whereas I think some of these guys that we've said, Robbins, Chapman, they've proven that they can do that, even if it's in different situations, but they've at least proven at the collegiate level they have pretty much had what it takes to be able to play 25, 30 minutes a game.
Okay, we said it is the rest of the cast that probably determines where this team goes. Let's start with some returnees. Jordan Wright, probably the guy in that group that we haven't mentioned yet, most likely to start. Tyron Lawrence, a combo guard, probably maybe more of a point, although probably not with Pippen so much, but a guy I think they've seen as a point guard who had his season derailed with injury last year, Miles Stute, a wing type, maybe power forward type who can step out and shoot it a bit. And then Trey Thomas, the diminutive guard who flashed some offense at times. Wright to me is the guy that I think you can count on to contribute. The rest of the guys, I'm not as sure. Who do you really look for contributions there before we round it out with the other newcomers? And I think there'll be some significant minutes coming from those guys. But to me, out of this group of the guys coming back, Wright is sort of the known commodity. Thomas, a guy that might can help him, although the defense I think is lacking. How do you size up those other returnees?
Yeah, that's the question because I don't think there's an answer yet. You said right. I mean, he's the one that certainly just based on what we saw from him, or really what we've seen from him, I guess, just overall the past couple seasons in terms of the development and all that, he is going to be someone they're going to need to rely on. And now, that he moves into sort of an upperclassman type role after playing a couple seasons already, I think that he's going to be an important part of it because, like we said, you can't just say, all right, we've got 5 guys, let's go and let's hope for the best. You've got to have some of these other guys step up. The problem is, out of that group, I don't know which one of those are going to maybe step into that bigger role, but I do expect that, there's at least 1 or 2 that's going to be able to do that. And that's where I think you start to look at it and say, well, maybe that's where you can make the assumption that they're going to have more depth than they've had in recent seasons. Even though, of the group you mentioned, I still think it's hard to figure out exactly who's going to be maybe coming out of that as all right, there's that breakout player that we didn't exactly know who it was going to be, but it probably is going to be maybe someone from that, potential group, but it's hard to know, like I said, outside of Wright, maybe what you're going to get from some of those guys in particular.
Yeah, Quentin Malora-Brown, another guy we didn't discuss, he'll probably back up Robbins at the post, but yeah, you look at this roster, Blake, and I kind of summarize it this way. I think you've got Pippen's a star. Robbins is a guy that could be really good. Maybe if everything goes well, a second-team All-SEC player. Chapman, a guy I think almost certainly will start. Wright, a guy almost certainly will start. And then from there, 5 to 13, it's guys, and we really have no idea who's going to hit and who's going to miss. The newcomers we have not talked about. We did mention Frank. Shane Dezonie, who was a top 100 recruit, who was signed at Arizona after the coaching situation there got out of that, signed with Vanderbilt. Peyton Daniels, who had been a top 150 recruit by a lot of services at one point. I think he stayed in the top 100 at least 1 or 2, although on the bottom end, he's a combo guard, maybe a point guard under other circumstances if Pippen's not there. Gabe Dorsey, a wing that they signed early, another top 150 kid. And then Jermaine Mann, a player who was a really highly rated 4-star guy out of high school for a while, somehow wound up at Gardner-Webb. A year ago, averaged 21 minutes, almost 7 points, a little bit over 5 boards. To me, it's a crapshoot in terms of which of those guys can contribute. If you believe the recruiting rankings, Dezonie, I think, is the best bet. But how do you see the rest of the newcomers here?
Yeah, like you said, with someone like Mann, that's kind of the situation we brought up, a few minutes ago about this is a guy who produced, but, I think you always have questions. I think, if you're coming from, let's say, the Big South, somewhere like that into the SEC, I think you're always going to have questions about maybe what's that jump from a development standpoint. But of that group you mentioned, one thing I will say is I think what we have been able to say about Jerry Stackhouse in his first couple of seasons is he hasn't necessarily had a ton to work with from, I think, again, that's where we talk about the lack of depth and all that. It's really been on display. But I think what he has had, he has been able to develop, I think, in a pretty good way. And now not everyone has been able to, emerge as all SEC type talents or anything like that. But I think he has proven that he's able to get the most out of some of the guys he's had at times. Again, not every single player, but I think you can make the case for some of those guys he's done that with. And I think you'll see the same thing here with some of these guys that they're going to add to the roster. Whether that is someone like Dezonie or whether it is, maybe a man comes in and is able to contribute right away. I think those are the ones that Vanderbilt's still a team with unknowns. And let's not act like, it's not. And we're not saying that I think we're like, oh, here they go. They're going to automatically be in the NCAA tournament conversation. But I think you're willing to, at least now, maybe give them the benefit of the doubt based on some of the guys that they do have coming in and with getting Pippen back. That's where I'm probably going to give Jerry Stackhouse the benefit of the doubt and saying that of this group of guys that were like, well, maybe flip a coin on 5 of these guys, whether they're going to wind up playing 20 minutes a game or maybe they play 5 minutes a game. I'm willing to bet that probably 2 or 3 of those guys are going to get to that point where maybe they are able to, not out of necessity, have to play 20 minutes a game, but maybe they just are kind of proven to the point where, hey, maybe we need them on the floor that much to be successful. So I think that's where they get to. Like I said, I don't think it's a 100% guarantee or anything, but I'm at least more optimistic right now with the Vanderbilt program maybe than I would have been in the same scenario a year ago or 2 years ago.
Yeah, I like the way you summed that up. I think that's a good way to put it. Bottom line, Blake, I think this is the team that is going to have a tough time making the NCAA tournament. But I think the NIT, tell me if you agree or disagree, maybe not as much of a stretch. And again, I think this is the team that this time around should be able to avoid the Wednesday night game. At least has got a better chance of it coming in than it's had in a while. Where do you think this team winds up?
Yeah, I think absolute best case scenario, they're an NCAA tournament bubble team. And look, I don't know if I'm underselling that, but I am, again, not just looking at it from Vanderbilt. I think you have to look at it as a whole. And I see 6 or 7 potential top 25 SEC teams right now heading into the season. So that's where the challenge comes in. If you're trying to compare it, I think the SEC has, again, 6 or 7. Like I would probably say 6 surefire potential preseason top 25 teams right now. And then there are, a couple other teams that could be in that category. So I think at best, if everything goes according to plan, you could be an NCAA tournament bubble team, maybe, a top NIT type team. Worst case scenario, I don't even want to go there anymore because, as we've seen, unfortunately, sometimes we've seen that play out with Vanderbilt over the years. But I think a lot of that's had to do with injuries and such. So you can't predict those kind of things. But I do think this is a team that winds up has a chance to finish outside of that Wednesday night game. Although I think it's hard to say that, I feel good about them being 7 or 8 in the SEC. I think maybe realistically, maybe it's 9 or 10 because, there are certain teams, I think, of Georgia, Texas A&M, South Carolina, Missouri, those 4 in particular, I think you have a lot of questions about heading into this season. And I think Vanderbilt, in fairness, may have just as many questions in some of those cases when you compare them to those teams in particular. But could you see Vanderbilt catapulting above those 4? Maybe. I think yes, based on Scottie Pippen coming back and based on some of the newcomers we talked about. So I think that's where you look at them and say, even if they're not in the NCAA tournament, I think they're at least in that direction to get there. But I also think that it's going to be a challenge to probably get in that conversation of maybe being an NCAA tournament bubble team.
Yeah, you raised some good points there. An injury-free year, which Vanderbilt has not had in a long time. And it's not just getting guys hurt. It is getting like the 2 or 3 guys that you absolutely do not want to get hurt. That is just bitten them like perhaps it has bitten nobody else. But anyway, it should be a more interesting season for Vanderbilt than it's been in a while. We'll have you covered when it happens here at the 14. He's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. Thank you for listening to our preview of Vanderbilt. We've got many more to come, so be sure to listen to those as